Cope.
Yeah, season 4. It's not updated. It's still on August 31st. But yeah, it'll still work. Don't mind it. But anyways, it's Will here. Welcome back here to RezRootz. I do want to make quick announcements here that we are, well, not me, but we do have students here that are a part of the team. I'm not going to say more, but they do have other responsibilities they got to deal with, and so forgive us as we're not consistent. We don't have a lot of time for us to invest into RezRootz. I always wish we could, but we have a lot of other responsibilities. So be patient with us. I know we're already a week behind with the video, but that's fine. It'll be up. But anyways, welcome back here. And as you can see, the topic for today is going to be on generational trauma. But I do have a guest here. His name is...
It says J Mike here. I don't know who J Mike is. It's me. I like that name. I like that tag.
Or J Man.
J Man. Yeah.
No, remember I got it when I gave you that name?
No.
When we talked about gossip being shared more than gospel. And I was like, at the bar.
I drop a bar.
Yeah.
J Mike. That's great.
Now, real quick, how you doing? How's life? What do you do?
Good. Well, my radio face. I don't know about this camera, but I'm trying not to be too distracted. I'm just gonna focus here. Yeah. But it's an honor to be on here. This is my first time on RezRootz.
That's your second time.
As you know.
It's your second time.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Oh, that's right. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was honor.
Okay, first one-on-one.
Yeah.
First roundtable discussion on RezRootz with my man, Big Will, my friend.
Yeah.
Wow, that's right. Okay. So Josh Manning, and here at Indian Bible College, super privileged to be on staff, work in student life. My compadre here.
Yeah.
Will and I work with the men, not the boys, the men here on campus.
Yeah.
And I love working with Will. It's one of my highlights of being here. Keeps me here. Yeah. Besides God's call. And teach as well, and I do RezRootz for the second time. So
I didn't think he is. No, it's like, guys, be patient with Manning because he just got out of class.
I might have brain freezes. I don't know.
He might be like, so be patient with him because he just got done teaching the class. So, but and it's been I'm excited to do this with you. So let's jump right in it. Mm-hmm. So, for you guys to understand why I wanted to talk about this topic, as you guys know, with Native America, or I think what really kind of, sparked it back up and what really ignited everything is when the graves were found, the grave marks were found, and then they realized these graves were unmarked, and more these graves at the residential schools began to be found, and they kind of just spiked. It spiked like crazy, and a lot of wounds and a lot of people's past hurt and experiences the wounds started opening back up, and the hurt started getting back up more again, and have family too that were either survivors or they know survivors, or there's just a lot of trauma that they've experienced with similar stuff with that. So then another one too is Kelly. I was actually supposed to be doing this with Kelly a long time ago.
KJ.
Yeah, KJ. Yeah, so we were supposed to do it, but I think we did record it, but that was almost 2 hours long. And we just scrapped it, but now that I think about it now, I was we could have just did 2 parts.
It's true. It's true.
But we know that's no longer here. It's in the cloud. So, but then not only that too. This is my heart for I know the same for Manny is a heart for Native people and Indigenous people, and a part of us here with student life. That's honestly what we do is we help students go, with their daily lives or, whatever traumas or baggage they may be dealing with. We, would do whatever we could to help them, walk alongside them with that. So in this trauma and counseling it's kind of in our area. So we,
True. Yeah.
so we kind of do this pretty much daily and throughout the week. So. But one thing that when I was doing a lot of research about this was and I was kind of like, I don't want to say guilty of it, but I thought the same way, is that historical trauma and generational trauma were the same thing. I thought they were, I thought generational trauma really relates with historical, or, likewise. Both ways they actually do intertwine together. They actually come together, but there's actually a huge difference between them if you actually look at the definitions and then kind of understanding the why behind both, or the what behind both. So a definition that I found from a website, I forgot the name of it, it's a huge acronym, but it's SAMHSA. That's the website, their acronym. But historical trauma is cumulative, multi-generational, collective experience of emotional and psychological injury in communities and descendants. And then another quote that I found from that website is, acute problems, domestic violence, or alcohol misuse that are not directly linked or to historical trauma, but may be exacerbated by living in a community with unaddressed grief and behavioral health needs. So historical trauma is more focusing on the group aspect of things, there's another example of Native Americans with the whole, the colonization or those kind of things. That's more of the group side of things. And then the generational trauma there's a definition that I found from American Psychiatric Association. Generational trauma, the intergenerational and unconscious grief from the historical trauma experienced by indigenous peoples is passed from generation to generation due to forced relocation, dispossessions, and loss of spiritual practices, language, and cultures. And in other words, too, is either experiences of abuse, and then domestic violence. What else is there? Drugs, alcohol. It's all there, and those are I guess you could say symptoms of generational trauma. So to give you guys just my own little personal story of generational trauma. I think of the time when I came here to IBC, I, grew up with a house of guys that kind of always stuck to themselves. And again, I'm not doing this out of shaming my family or calling them out or anything. It's just how we grew up. Is the only time we ever communicated emotions or expressions or feelings was through physical fighting. If you're mad, let's fight about it. If you're gonna do this, let's fight about it. And I realized that for me, that was something that was really normal to me. And when I came here to IBC, it was always fighting and really verbal abusive words to each other, and then coming to IBC, having everyone come up to you and say, "How are you doing? You doing okay?" Well, it just shocks you. What the heck? Don't worry about what I'm doing, man. It's we don't do those kind of things. We don't talk about it. And I think that's where, as time goes on, Manning got to see that worst end of me when, I was really at the end of it, where it was kind of really heavy, where I was really trying to fight people. And that's where the Holy Spirit really worked and really showed me that these were patterns and things that I was following, and it was very humbling, but it was also very heartbreaking of how long I was really thinking those things were normal. And I was reflecting on that, my grandparents, or my grandfather and my dad, it was like a cycle. Because my grandfather did the same thing to my dad. I'm putting a standard on him. And then my dad put a standard on my brothers. And then my brothers put a standard on me. And I would never make those standards use the fist, or a belt, or verbal abuse. And that's I guess that's my experience of generational trauma. But so one thing I wanted to ask you, Ming, is what is your thoughts on generational trauma, and what is your perspective on it from just to hear from your side?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, because I actually hadn't thought about the distinction between historical and generational trauma until you brought it up. And it makes a lot of sense. The whole, like you said, the group dynamic for historical, and the personal dynamic you said earlier was more the generational. And I think very different background than you, but in a sense, there is definitely some that I can relate with, even with some of those differences. The historical trauma from my family, or my people group, I don't have that. I am pretty Irish, Scottish, but I don't connect with that, so there's not that mental, emotional affiliation, which probably protects me from some historical trauma that would be there. But I think that the generational one is the one that jumped out to me as I read the definition, and as you and I talked about it. On a personal level, my family grew up in SoCal, and I'm actually first generation Christian, so I did grow up in a Christian home. My parents trusted Christ later on in life, in their 30s, and so they had a totally different life before that. And the crazy thing is, I never experienced a lot of the baggage from that generational trauma that was there for multiple generations on both my parents' side, especially my dad's side. But I've heard my dad talk about it in the past, at least. My siblings saw it because they were in the home, BC, before Christ, for my parents. So some of the same, in fact, it's crazy, as much as we're different, there are some of the same generational trends and trauma due to addiction, alcohol. For men especially, the womanizing, and just a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of those things that, even for me, though I am so thankful, I'm so thankful for God's transforming work in my parents and my dad especially. For all of us, I know there's residual things that are still there even when we come to Christ, and that's this refining process. But hearing back to when my siblings were growing up and how different it was, their experience with my father especially, and it's hard for me to connect with that, but I know it was there. And so I hear the power of, like you said, the cycle that continues for, like I said, in these areas of addiction and abuse and neglect would have been for multiple generations. And ironically too, this is back in the good old days, when really, at least for majority society, white America was better, maybe than now in some ways. And yet even then, there were these trends of trauma, self-inflicted a lot of times, of addiction and abuse. And so in a sense, I can relate with the generational part, even if it's removed by a generation, but I can, totally connect in that area at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that's one thing I said, it's cool to always hear from your side of things, your perspective, because that was the other thing. I think that's what maybe is a good thing that we scrapped the one that me and Kelly did, because for me as a native, I always thought it was just natives, natives are really ones that struggle with generational trauma. It's you guys don't know nothing. I was and that just shows you again the historical trauma.
Yeah.
That gives you a good example. That's what I was. I was really traumatized by just the historical events that happened. And I was too busy not really hearing the other side, but I was too busy. Like, hey, you guys, well, we were here first. You guys heard us. You did this. You did that. And the crazy thing is about that, though, is that I read, I did the history, I read the history, learned the history. And my grandfather and my dad my grandfather, Horace Hagstall, was, the longhouse leader. And then my father was passed on to the longhouse, or the longhouse was passed to him. And it was crazy because my grandfather was one that was saying, like, don't do anything, or not don't do anything, but if you wanted to go to church, go to church, that's totally fine, But then my father, on the other hand, again, I'm not calling my father out, but he was telling me, like, the entitlement was like, go to the longhouse, follow your ways. And then, the white man season. I'm sorry if that was really offensive. I don't know.
The white man?
The white. But there was, there's a lot of missionaries that come to the Rez. Like, it was like, literally, I remember my dad and I were driving, I think it was to the longhouse, or we're going to the mountain, just something like that. I was with them in the car, and there was a church on Main Street. And we were driving by, and these people were coming out of the vans, and my dad was like, those people, you gotta stay away from them. No explanation. He's like, just stay away from them. And the reason why I say that too is because I feel like a lot of Native people, like around my age, aren't just told to do stuff just because they're told. But really never really think about, like, why did you tell me that? Why did you tell me to stay away from it? Like, did they do something to you, or do you just not? Are you just mad of the color of the skin? Are you mad? Like, is it because what they did, or like? And that's something that always stuck out to me, because like, my dad really never, still to this day, he never told me why. He just told me just stay away from that. And just being engraved with that, and that's literally what I did. I was hanging out, and all my friends were around them, like, you gotta stay away from them people, man. Just stay away, So I always thought generational trauma was just natives, but realizing that generational trauma was globally, and was like all the ethnicities in the world, and everyone experienced it in some sort of way. But
I think that just on that note, it made me think of this. Like, it's almost like this whole idea, we talk about discipleship a lot here, right? And like, modeling is the way that we share life. One of the major ways we share life, and one of the major ways we disciple and make disciples. But it's almost like when you're talking about generational trauma, it's almost like negative or evil, sinful modeling. And we're making disciples of addicts and abusers and neglectors, and I mean, that's just who we are at the core as humans. I think it's really interesting that it's the flip side. When we don't model Christ-likeness, we model the flesh and who we are. Like, that's the result. This trauma that's intergenerational. So when you're talking, like, if you do that, and jumped out.
So, I wanted to ask you too is, and this is something that we talked about earlier, is like, where do you see something relating to generational trauma in the Bible?
Yeah, we had to do our research. We had to do our inductive Bible study skills. I had to put in to good work, which is really cool. We did not have much time to do this, but fortunately today had a lot of just time to reflect, and I was thankful for Will's intentionality. But let me just pull up. I got my real Bible over here, but let me pull up this fake one. Sure, like glasses.
It's not on camera, but
no,
he's a really big Bible.
It's like so big. It's not no space over here.
Bigger Bible than Marley. That's good.
So in First Kings, Will and I were looking for examples of this, like this cycle that he talked about, and so what came to our minds was 1 Kings chapter 16, and where Lord kind of directed my attention was the king we all know from the northern kingdom of Israel, Ahab, big bad Ahab, who married Jezebel. We know this guy, and it's very interesting. He wasn't the beginning of the problems that he brought on himself or his family or his kingdom. And in verse 29 of 1 Kings 16, it says, Ahab, son of Omri, began to rule over Israel in the 38th year of King Asa's reign in Judah, the southern kingdom. Ahab reigned in Samaria 21 years. Verse 30, but Ahab, son of Omri, did what was evil in the Lord's sight, even more than any of the kings before him in Israel, the northern kingdom. And as though it were not enough, I love that, the NLT translates it, as though it were not enough to follow the sinful example or model of Jeroboam, by the way, that's 6 generations before, he married Jezebel, the daughter of King Ethbaal of the Sidonians, and he began to bow down in worship of Baal. First, Ahab built a temple and an altar for Baal in Samaria. Then he set up an Asherah pole. He did more to provoke the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than any of the other kings of Israel before him, which is crazy. And we were looking together we were just kind of astonished with this cycle, like at least 6 generations that this guy is a result of. And so, and actually, I don't know, we didn't talk about this, but even the southern kingdom intermixed in here had the same issue, not as bad as the northern kingdom, but yeah, it's intergenerational. And we're talking, 5-6 generations back in what the text says here in terms of this idolatry, raising up idols like Jeroboam had done 6 generations before, sexual immorality, sleeping around with not just Jewish women but Gentile women that they were not called to even intermarry with at the time. All these different things, and you see violence, you see domestic violence, crazy. It brings out that in these stories, all these areas of trauma. But you can see not that it doesn't take Ahab out of the equation in terms of he has a responsibility personally, but this guy had a lot of baggage. He had a lot of evil modeling or discipling in his family. And it even became the historical, when you're talking about this, it reminded me that it became the historical trauma of the Northern Kingdom. This is what they were known for. Wow, it is so there. So yeah, I never looked at it like that in the same way.
Yeah, because I think that's what just trips me out too, is reading through this. I was like, dang. And I was listening to it as well. I was like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And then, even on, he kind of how, the Lord was with Jeroboam, reading First Kings 15:34, where he's like, because again, even the verses before it talks about, these other kings, but then he ends out the chapter with this and continues more later. But this one stood out to me. But he did what was evil in the Lord's sight and followed the example of Jeroboam, continuing the sins that Jeroboam did that had led Israel to commit. And that's what just blows my mind of never noticing, again, I was too busy thinking of the historical and more of my own hurt from it and looking at me and didn't realize there's a lot of people in the world that has faced historical and generational trauma.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that's it's clearly a human thing from your story especially, and then you see thousands of years earlier in Israel that this is a trend. This is not a new thing. It's interesting too that it would take one generation to begin the traumatic cycle, and in other places, I'm trying off the top of my head, King Josiah or Jehoshaphat, for Judah at least, it would take one generation to stop the traumatic experience or that traumatic cycle, which is what a powerful statement to modeling and influence just one person, one generation. So
Yeah, so then talking about the generational trauma, we also want to kind of touch on the effects of it. These are just some of my own takes of what generational trauma and what I've seen on the reservation and anywhere as well. And the first one I do want to talk about was the abuse. I kind of I shared my story in the beginning about how my grandfather set the standard for my dad. My dad never met that standard, and the belt, the fist, the boot, whatever it may be. And then as my dad got older, the anger, the hurt that he experienced from those experiences built up. And then the coping mechanism would go down to alcohol, drugs, because that's where, I guess, there's those sayings that alcohol shows you who you really are. And my dad, as a kid, I was my dad's scary because I've always seen him yell, seen him fight, seen him, come at me. He's 6'5", so he's a big dude. So he'd be really scared.
I want this fight too.
So I was thinking, that he was really angry, and that's how I saw him. And I think for a while as I was growing up, that's how I ever saw him. It was this whole, angry man that stuffed all these emotions in and ran to the bottle. But then now, as I've progressed and grown in my faith, the alcohol actually showed that he was hurting, and that's what got me emotional. And the abuse that he was getting abused by his dad. He was unaware that he was abusing his kids the same way, because it was just so engraved in his head. This is how I was taught, and I would teach you the same way. We don't know anything different. And the other one too that it says depression, but I forgot to add grief on there as well. Depression and grief. Depression, though, feeling lonely, as being on the reservation, being even in cities, sometimes people feel alone as well. I know that from some of my coworkers that even here at Little Caesars, they feel alone. So that's where I was blown away. It's like, we're in the city, bro. There's many things to do in the city, but somehow they still feel alone. They feel lonely. They start even getting into their thoughts. They start feeling depressed and whatnot. And then going to the reservation side of things, you see, it's very isolated. It's very, very rare things you can do out there other than, walking around the res. I can't speak for other tribes, but for mine, we have a lot of basketball courts. A lot of gyms and all that stuff. We can do those things, but sometimes maybe you're not into those things, or you may be. And the honest side of things too is that sometimes even, again, no condemnation here or shaming anybody, but sometimes even your own native people can make you feel that way. You're not cool enough to play ball with us, or you're not cool enough to hang out with us anyways. It's like, what are you doing here? And that really leads more to the depression side of things. And the grief, I want to talk about the grief because this one is heavy on my heart. And this man knows me, and experienced a lot of it, and being here at IBC and dealing and processing through a lot of grief. And on an honest side of things, I really disagree with natives saying don't talk about death. And when I came to that realization of that is when I lost my grandfather, because it just didn't make sense, because my grandpa was telling me it's okay to feel those ways, it's okay to feel those things. And when we were at his funeral, and the person officiating was telling everyone, no tears, or no, don't cry. And I was like very angry as I'm like, well, you telling me I can't cry, and then we were taught to not talk about the individual for a whole year. That doesn't explain itself, and that's where the huge problem. That's where it really, I feel like that's where it really factors a lot from, is because when I lost my grandpa, my brothers were struggling a lot with alcohol and drugs, and they were not allowed to talk about those things, because when you stuff these emotions and these feelings in, that's what the outcome comes to, with the coping mechanisms like alcohol and drugs, sexual relationships, anything that helps us not talk about what the grief and the root of the issue. We don't talk about that. We're just gonna go do these things. We're gonna do drugs, alcohol. I'm gonna put this mask on. I'm not gonna talk about it. And that's where people don't realize, is that when you're hurting, you end up starting either hurting yourself even more, or you end up hurting someone around you, or even the people around you. And that's why it's so heavy on my heart. I totally disagree with that. And everyone that knows me is like, I'll cry in front of you and show no shame. I was like, I just cry a lot in general. So, but those things, and I think of now Indian Horse, or at the end of the movie, he went to a therapy session. That's Indian Horse is about residential schools and whatnot. But the counselor was telling the survivor, have you ever cried before? And for some reason that just, like, whoa, he really thought about it. Because he was like, and the counselor was saying, like, well, you got to do it here with us, or find a time for you to go out, let it out. Because of that silence, it's killing you. And I was like, dang, if that explains it all right there. Is when we're quiet, stuff it all in, it builds up, you're hurting, and you don't realize that you're coping by drinking and smoking, relationships, and it's just, And then the other one too, going back to it as well, as the anger issues and the bitterness. You see a lot of people, like, again, kind of going back to the whole idea of the historical trauma. Stay away from those people, or blame shifting on, you're the reason why I'm this way, and then you're making this you, but not me. It's always you did this, and there were times in my life too where I had those kind of talks with my mom and dad, where I was really blaming them for the reason why I am today. It's like, you could have done better, you could have done this, but then that's another, like, an effect of generational traumas, the blame shifting. And then the last one is the rough one, is the suicide. You see a lot of that, and especially, I know, Native America is higher than the national average of suicides. And that's where, like, my heart really breaks, because being here at ABC, we have the people around us, we have a community, right? But people out there on the reservations, they don't have that at all. Then the lies in their head start to get the best of them, and the environment they're in, the family environment, maybe there's a lot of abuse, maybe there's a lot of anger issues, maybe there's a lot of drugs and alcohol involved. All of that just builds up, and people fall into that lie of suicide. And knowing that I have a lot of friends and family that have committed suicide, and that's where it goes back into the grief. We don't want to talk about that, and we don't want to talk about why the individual committed suicide. it shakes us up to our core. Like I know it does. Like I've seen my family and friends, like they're shook by it, but they don't want to like. We're told not to talk about it. But then again, the outcome goes back: drugs, alcohol, any unhealthy coping mechanisms. Anything you want to add to
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that so much, Will. I think that the grief is what jumped out to me too. It's interesting that this seems to be such a core issue that connects with these other ones that you're talking about. Like these other ones are more symptoms. How I deal with grief has a lot to do with, these symptoms and what defines me, what controls me. I was thinking about grief in my life or my family as well. I hadn't thought about this before, but when you were talking, the fact that it seems like humans, we do a really good job either being defined by grief, like from a human perspective, we either are defined by grief or we deny there is grief. I think in the end, like you were saying, if we pacify it, we try to fly and escape from the grief, it will eventually haunt us enough where it comes out. It is going to define us one way or the other. I think when I was growing up, the biggest grief that I had to walk through was losing my mom to cancer when I was 14. And she had battled cancer for 5 years. So most of my memory bank of my mom is, like is with cancer and very sick and even dying. And I remember seeing some of the things that my family did in response to that grief when she did pass eventually, and it was very much a denial that there is hurt here. She was a Christian, believer in Jesus. We knew where she was. It was almost an extra excuse to deny the hurt and the pain and the loss. And I wonder, looking back now, there was probably a lot of modeling that had happened. We were good, all-American people, hard workers, good work ethic. Kind of like, ironically, very similar to what you were taught in terms of culturally and ethnically. There was shame in tears. There was shame in being too impacted by grief. And so in a weird way, you were taught to just suck it up and move on and worry about yourself and keep going. Don't let the grief or the rest of the family hold you back. You do what's best for you. And so it's interesting that there was a lot of unconscious, I think, modeling and cycling of this trauma of not dealing with grief well and denying it was there. But just even in my own life, I think certainly it's human nature and my personality, but I think I watched other people deal with grief by escaping, by avoiding, by denying it was an issue. And as an introvert and somebody that processes it a lot, I had a lot of dark thoughts, a lot of depression that came. I didn't know to call it that, but I know that's what it was now. And it's because I let the grief, like you were saying, define me, because I denied it at first, and then I was handling it on my own, where God really wasn't telling me to deny it, but he was wanting to define me in the midst of that pain and grief so that I was refined and was made more like him. But by taking it in my own hands and trying to just avoid it and deny that it was an issue, I really missed out on his goal of grief to bring me close to him. But I see that in my family. That was the MO. That was the norm, to just get through it, push through it, like you were saying, just almost pretend it wasn't an issue. So yeah, just very interesting, some of the similarities there.
Yeah.
But it's same impact with different characteristics. But really interesting.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to talk about too, as we're about to wrap it up here, is talking about the tips to help you heal from generational trauma. To me, I wasn't really going to plan it, but I feel like it'll fit in really well. And I'm telling you guys, I have a really open and honest, transparent part of my life. So over the summer, I went home, got to go visit home, and had my son with me the whole time I was there. And we were coming into the last days of my visit there, and
We were spending much time as we can, playing basketball in 90 something degree weather outside there.
Hardcore.
There's humidity too. So, like my son was fine. I thought that's where I passed out. Like, son, just go back home.
Trade wanted to come back to 7,000 feet. Is that
Not
quite.
Yeah, it was just like crazy. But I actually remember though, it was my last night there, and I was really praying and just really processing, like thanking the Lord of the time I had being home and the amount of quality time with son that I had. Not really having no phones involved or anything. It's just me and him in the moment. And the morning of my flight, I was packing up, finishing my packing, and that's where, seeing the Lord really move. Because my son really is, very closed off. He's good, like he'll be happy and stuff. But there we go. I think he's like, you wonder, like, is he okay? Like, and for me, as an emotional man, I'm always gonna push my son's buttons. Like, hey, what's going on? Like, you okay? Like, what are you thinking? What's on your mind? He knows I'm doing that alone. I'm not like, tell me. He just knows that's who I am. Like, I'm an emotional guy, and he already knows I cry a lot. So, but anyways, we're hugging, and as I was hugging him, he started to feel him breathing harder, and I started to feel the lump on his chest, like he's about to cry, and immediately I was like, Lord, like, let him cry. Just let him cry. Let him get it out. And I had my son. Then after that, my son bursted, and I told him it's okay, let it out. He's bursting out crying. And the reason why, there was a lot of tears of joy in that, because he's letting those emotions out. He could have been like, hug, all right, see you when you come back up, Dad. He could have been like, quick hug, bye, and not say anything, but no. He allowed him, so I wanted to know that he's okay to cry. And I was holding him, and I was talking in his ears, like, just let it out, it's okay. And he was crying, and I was holding him, and just letting him cry. I wasn't telling him, like, tell me how you're feeling. It wasn't like, just cry. And the reason why I bring that up, again, I'm not shaming my parents at all, but there was times where I was told not to do those things. As a kid, my mom, I remember when I think we brought her to a treatment or somewhere. We dropped her off somewhere. And, I was crying. But she told me, stop. And we were going to see each other. It's like, you don't need to do all that. Basically, kind of shut me off, like, don't do that. And same thing with my dad. My dad was like, you'll be okay. I'm like, don't do that. It's okay. It's kind of similar to my mom, but not more aggressive. He was just saying, it's okay. So, you don't gotta do all that. Chill. But for me, that all came to my head as soon as my son started crying. And that right there was, I call a cycle breaking moment. Just letting my son know, don't be afraid to cry in front of me. It's like, because for one, I'm gonna cry with you. So I'll cry with you because, you cry in front of me, I'm gonna start crying. But for one, and for two, is that you can be honest with everything, with your tongue, you can be honest with me with all things. You don't have to fall into that lie of saying, you're not allowed to show your emotions. You're allowed to free however you want to feel. So, the tips for that, I would say, is allowing yourself to cry. allowing yourself to release those emotions. You know, in other words, I'm saying, let yourself have a good cry. You know, sometimes that's all we need is just a good cry to let these emotions out. And other tip that I have too, that I actually found very beneficial for me, is journaling the experiences I had. As very scary that may sound like, but I journal about all of the, you know, the domestic violence, very detailed. I journaled all the dumb stuff that I did. I all detailed out. And what I do after I journal those out, I read it aloud to process those and to actually, you know, put that out there and stop letting me keep it build up in here, but to allow it to let it come out. And that's why I say I think journaling it, because you're helping to get it out of your system, your head, your mind, your heart, your soul. And because, you know, I call that journal the black book. It's literally a black journal. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's everything.
Yeah.
Reason why that too is why I want to journal those things is because, you know, my whole goal for my journals is to pass those on to my son, to help him just not to do the same stuff that I did, but maybe learn a lot of things from the things that I have learned in my life that he can maybe apply to his life as well. Because, you know, it's the sin, the generational sin is going to be there. And in my mind, I was like, I'm going to keep him away from all of that, but obviously I'm not the savior. But allowing yourself to journal your experiences. And then the third one, what really helped me through all of that was Jesus Christ himself. Him taking on those burdens. Because, you know, Native culture, they look at him as the white man, which is very, I think, not true at all. You know, a Mediterranean Jew, you know, is probably dark as me, maybe even darker, maybe a little more Rez, who knows. You know, it's literally, you know, we think of Jesus as this white man's God, or even this white Messiah, but really, Jesus is the one that actually came down and walked me through that trauma, that pain, that hurt, through his people and through his word. Because, you know, we are quick to, again, going back to historical trauma, we're quick to look at that. But we never are quick to actually sit down and listen to who Jesus really is. Jesus is the one that really loves you for who you are. He would be the first to condemn of what happened in the past. And we can question, why did he allow it? And that can come off bad, but you know, there's a lot of things that God can turn bad into good for his good. It's a matter of you as an individual taking off those glasses, you'd say, instead of historical trauma, and actually putting on different glasses to actually look at it differently. Because I was one of those people. I was looking at things the wrong way. And not to belittle anything of what happened with us as Native people, but you do have the option for yourself to actually say, what can I grow from? How can I heal from this? What can I do from this? Because it would be easy just to point the fingers, like it's your fault why I'm this way. I can't do nothing about it. But in reality, we could do anything about it. We can do something about it. But it's up to you. And that's where I'm saying is that's where I made that choice to follow him, follow Jesus. And Jesus really showed me who I am in him and who he says I am. And then the love, the faithfulness for sure. And not only that, just the healing that he has brought to me. And all of that he's going back to because I allowed him to. I allowed him to go in those areas in my life and that's where I seen him really work and move to help me to walk in that forgiveness, not just for the forgiveness of what happened to Native people, but also the forgiveness of the people that has hurt me. And those are still processed, and that's totally fine. But, you know, the Lord is, what was that verse? Philippians 1:6.
Correct. Yeah.
He who began a good work in you will carry on to completion
Yeah.
until the day of Christ. Something like
Yeah.
yeah. But I just wanted, the reason why I say those things is because I want you guys to know that Jesus is not the Jesus they portrayed in the past. It's the Jesus I know is the one who loves, the one who cares, the one who is actually willing to come down to meet you where you are and to help you walk you through those feelings. And to be really honest with that too is, I remember I was praying to God about all those things, and I was very upfront and honest. God wasn't like, oh man, you're angry. You know, I was like, oh man, you got a lot going on. But then God was like, I got you. So, but maybe you want to add to that?
I hate to add to it. That's really good. I love what you said about the glass, the glasses though. When you were talking, actually a little earlier, and God laid this in my heart, but it totally goes right along with what you were saying. Like tips to deal with trauma, and I love how you said it. These cycle breakers, right?
Yeah.
Cycle breaking moments. I was gonna
Daniel Brown, the old Bible.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the old too now. Watch out, people. Here we go. So I'm teaching in James right now, so I was thinking about this today. But it really connects with what you said about the glasses in James 1:21. I remember like James written to Christians who were ethnically Jewish, so they knew trauma, right? I mean, they totally knew. I mean, historical for sure.
Yeah.
Thousands of years, especially now, New Testament, thousands of years of historical trauma, clearly generational trauma. These people know trauma, and this is who James is writing to. In verse 21 of chapter 1, he says, therefore lay aside all filthiness and overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. And just what you said, I really think you're taking my word for it, but I really believe he's saying what you just mentioned. This is a cycle, a trauma, cycle breaking moment or tip that James is giving, because like you said, it's rejecting, it's getting rid of the glasses that would be full of lies and deceit and depression and hopelessness and self-pity and victimhood, all these things that we tend to do when we're hurting, right? When we're grieving, when we're in a traumatic experience. And by the way, sometimes we bring the trauma on ourselves. Sometimes it's totally undeserved.
Yeah.
We just experience it, right? Like you were saying. But I have the choice now as a believer in Christ, like these Jewish Christians, in the face of the trauma, man, I could take those glasses off, the glasses of my lies, the world's lies, straight off. So I can reject, he says, lay aside all this wickedness, lay aside those glasses of all those lies, and instead receive with meekness, with humility, as a learner, put on the glasses of truth in the midst of that suffering, midst of that trauma. And I think it's really cool. It mentions these glasses that we're supposed to put on after we take off the glasses of our lies, the glasses of truth we put on, and it's actually the implanted word. And I think in the context, it seems like he's talking about our identity in Christ. He mentions the word that actually made us these precious possessions, his first fruit as believers. It's our new identity. And so the glasses we're supposed to put on is the truth of who we are and whose we are. And right when I'm tempted to just be crippled by the grief, not to ignore it, I'm not denying it, but I'm also not being defined by it. I get rid of the lie that I am defined, I'm made by all these traumatic experiences, historically, generationally, and instead I put the truth of who God says I am on. Then it says, which is able to save your souls. So when I do that, I reject, take those lies off, and put the truth on, receive that truth. There is salvation. It's like here and now salvation, where I'd be crippled, and it's proof. My family, for generations was crippled by trauma. And so in a sense, like my family wasn't saved from that traumatic experience, the hopelessness that the suffering brings. But he says here, I reject the lies, receive the truth, like you were saying, and then there's salvation here and now, so that I actually am saved from the hopelessness of that trauma. That's the trauma cycle breaker, another one. I don't know, but as I was thinking about earlier, and what you just said is perfect, like the cross.
It's awesome. Chills, dude. That's
so
crazy.
good.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that. It's so good.
Because that's where it's easily like, oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
They look at it that way, and those are okay. Like, we understand if you look at it that way.
Yeah.
It is bad. It is hurtful.
Yeah, totally.
It is damaging, but we can turn away from those things, and we can heal from those things.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of, it's up to you. And I know that's where the challenge of, who do we go to for that, or anyone.
Yeah.
But I just want to encourage you, the people that I went to with that is some leaders or anyone that you may trust, or let alone for me, I went to the Lord. And so I hope this was encouraging for you guys. I also want to say thank you again, Manning.
Yeah,
You went way over time. There's a lot. I can't pay you, but pay you sometime.
In heaven. No, I just
pay you
the other.
Pay you with a wicked coffee. So wicked easy.
Great.
But I just want to say thank you, Manning, and hope this is encouraging for you, and I also want to hope this encourages the listeners, as well as I hope this maybe give you a different idea of generational trauma. So again, thank you guys for listening, and I hope you guys have a good week. Love you.